Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Man, it has been a long week, but we're grateful to be at the end of it, and we're glad that you're with us. A lot to talk about today, including the forthcoming book from Kamala Harris, some of the absurdities coming from her, some of the absurdities coming in response to what she has to say. So we'll get into all of that. A little bit of Democratic food fighting seems to be in the works there. We'll also take a look at whether the murder of Charlie Kirk is going to lead to fewer conservatives on campus as a result of the security it might take to make sure that they're safe. But the biggest news, of course, Jim, is that I have not been so excited to hear these words since U.S. troops dragged Saddam Hussein out of a spider hole. We got him, from Utah Governor Spencer Cox. We'll talk about that a lot in a second. But man, what good news to wake up to.
It's when I remember thinking about the Boston Marathon bombing and how I believe that happened on a Monday. There was, it was very intense. There was a manhunt. I want to say like Wednesday or Thursday, we had the photo. I guess it was Wednesday they brought out the photos of the suspects. Thursday was the shootout in which one of them was killed. And on Friday afternoon, they caught the guy hiding in a boat in somebody's backyard. And it was like the entire gamut of emotions in the course of a week. This feels a little bit like that. A lot of lingering sadness and anger and frustration that we'll talk about in a bit. But I got to say, Greg, God, I've never been so thankful for Kamala Harris. We needed the laugh that we will have at our last martini and the topic of her memoir. And so thank you, Madam Vice President, former Madam Vice President. Your travails are very silly and make us laugh. And we kind of needed that this week.
In the meantime, we'll get to all the details as we know them, or at least a lot of them, from the arrest of this shooter in Utah. But first, let's quickly talk about your health, because more than 30% of Americans have a sluggish liver, a problem that often goes undetected until sometimes you're on the brink of some very serious health issues. And Dose is on a mission to educate all of us on why it's so important to maintain your liver health. And it's created an incredible product to help you do just that. It's called Dose for Your Liver and was formulated to cleanse your liver of unwanted elements, aid digestion, and maintain your body's filter.
Your liver is the second largest organ in your body. Yes, gentlemen, second largest, and it is responsible for more than 500 functions in your body. It acts as your body's filter. It flushes out all those unwanted elements and breaks down what you consume into essential nutrients. Well, Dose for Your Liver's science-backed formula promotes liver function, it aids digestion, it eases bloating, and it can even boost your energy levels.
The largest organ is your skin. Support your health with Dose Daily. Save 25% on your first month when you subscribe at dosedaily.co/3ml or enter the code 3ml at checkout. Please note the 25% discount applies only to subscription orders, not one-time purchases. Cancel anytime, no hassle. That's dosedaily.co/3ml to get 25% off your first monthly subscription with the code 3ml. All right, Jim, let's get right into it. President Trump actually broke the news on Fox and Friends this morning, saying that they were pretty strongly sure that they had the right guy in custody. The FBI and Utah Governor Spencer Cox completing a press conference earlier today. And based on the evidence they've lined up, it seems very likely that this is the person they've been hunting for nearly the past 48 hours now. Again, here's Utah Governor Cox exclaiming that they've got their man.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got him. On the evening of September 11th, a family member of Tyler Robinson reached out to a family friend who contacted the Washington County Sheriff's Office with information that Robinson had confessed to them or implied that he had committed the incident. This information was relayed to the Utah County Sheriff's Office and scene investigators at Utah Valley University. This information was also conveyed to the FBI. Investigators reviewed additional video footage from UVU surveillance and identified Robinson arriving on UVU campus in a gray Dodge Challenger at approximately 8:29 a.m. on September 10th, in which he is observed on video in a plain maroon t-shirt, light-colored shorts, a black hat with a white logo, and light-colored shoes. When encountered in person by investigators in Washington County on September 12th, the early morning hours, Robinson was observed in consistent clothing with those surveillance images. Investigators interviewed a family member of Robinson who stated that Robinson had become more political in recent years. The family member referenced a recent incident in which Robinson came to dinner prior to September 10th, and in the conversation with another family member, Robinson mentioned Charlie Kirk was coming to UVU. They talked about why they didn't like him and the viewpoints that he had. The family member also stated Kirk was full of hate and spreading.
And spreading hate is what he said there. He also offered a little bit of clarity on what was written on those shell casings.
Investigators discovered a bolt-action rifle wrapped in a dark-colored towel. The rifle was determined to be a Mauser Model 98 30-06 caliber bolt-action rifle. The rifle had a scope mounted on top of it. Investigators noted inscriptions that had been engraved on casings found with the rifle. Inscriptions on a fired casing read, "Notices, bulges, capital OWO, what's this, question mark." Inscriptions on the 3 unfired casings read, "Hey fascist, exclamation point, catch, exclamation point."
And so then there was also some language from an Italian resistance song from about 100 years ago that is now part of the Antifa messaging and so forth. And so, Jim, hardest thing you could possibly have to do probably is turn in your own kid for what's going to be a capital crime, most likely. Good on this dad who has actually had a career in law enforcement. I'm sure he's shattered, but this kid was radicalized somewhere along the way. The roommate ultimately cooperated here from what we're understanding, showing a lot of those messages on Discord, as the governor said. So they put this case together pretty quickly. And thankfully, the people who had some tough ideas probably going in their head did the right thing.
Yeah, look, I understand, and we were talking about this yesterday, in the sense, oh my goodness, the guy hasn't been caught yet. You know, sometimes it takes time in these kinds of investigations. And by the way, you know, God bless that father, God bless everybody who knew this perpetrator and who probably was, you know, seemingly shocked or horrified by what they did, and was, you know, like, it was apparently the Unabomber, a family member, was one who recognized the prose in that long diatribe printed in the Washington Post, and said, that sounds like, I believe it was the sister who said, that sounds like my brother. Probably the hardest thing he's ever going to have to do, but the world's a safer place because of what he did. So God bless that guy and ease his pain in the months and years to come. Also, just want to point, my colleague Charlie Kirk has a piece saying that Governor Cox has done everything right so far. And yes, we on this podcast, you and I complain about a lot of politicians, almost always deservedly so. You know, we should praise the ones who get it right. And this is a really tough situation. And it looks like Governor Cox has, you know, handled this right every step of the way. Kind of a dark lining to our good martini based on those descriptions. We'll know more when the full indictment comes out, but this looks pretty much exactly what we feared and suspected it was from the moment we heard that Charlie Kirk had been shot, that this was, you know, going to be somebody on the left, somebody Antifa adjacent, somebody who had been radicalized. And look, you know, one, if you're right of center out there and you're angry about this, it's perfectly fine to feel that anger. I think we all feel angry. Please don't go out and do something stupid. Please don't go out and do something don't lash out. I understand the desire to lash out. Punch a pillow, go work out, go scream, do whatever you need to do, but don't take it out on some schmo who just happens to be on the left side of the spectrum or something like that. Somebody had said, if conservatives had any guts, they would be out rioting. And my colleague Mark Wright said, why? What good would that do? Why would we burn down the houses of people who had nothing to do with this in some sort of, just to vent our rage? That doesn't help anything. But I think, look, and we'll talk about this more in the next martini, like, this does make us sit and think about, there is undoubtedly radicalized people on the left who genuinely believe what they're saying. The conservatives are evil and conservatives must be stopped by any means necessary, and who believe that it's perfectly legitimate to shoot somebody and kill them in order to stop that. And that's a real problem, and that's something that really we need law enforcement to be, this feels very 60s and 70s-ish. And so maybe we need some FBI, not just informants, maybe we need some people going undercover, maybe we need law enforcement to infiltrate these groups, because I went back and I found a headline, Antifa is mostly mythical, kind of like those mostly peaceful riots. That mostly mythical group just shot somebody and killed somebody, right? So ask people in Portland if Antifa is mostly mythical, right? So this hand-waving away of left-wing violence just isn't going to cut it anymore. And hopefully, the more we learn about the shooter, the more a long-delayed reckoning will be occurring On the other side of the aisle, of course, there's a lot of Democrats in this world who are good people who don't want to do any harm to anyone, but they kind of turned a blind eye for a while, and it's long since time for that to end.
Yeah, exactly. So then we've been dealing with this argument from the people trying to defend Antifa, and I find them thoroughly indefensible, no matter what argument you throw up there. I don't know how you say this lady's last name. She's been around in Washington journalism for a while. Julia Ioffe, or I don't know what it is. She co-founded Puck News, and then she tweets out yesterday after the Wall Street Journal reports on that law enforcement bulletin saying that the ammunition was engraved with anti-fascist sayings, which was confirmed by Governor Cox. And she says the sleight of hand required to make anti-fascist sound like a bad thing. Remember when the United States as a government and its policy was officially militantly anti-fascist during World War II? Just because you call yourself anti-fascist doesn't mean you are. They actually are the fascists.
Antifa believes that in the name of fighting fascism, they are permitted to murder people who disagree with them. Right? Like that's the most fascist thing you could do, right? That, take off the anti. I think the Babylon Bee has a headline this morning saying Antifa, in order to stop a fascist, punches a mirror. Anti-fascism, that's D-Day. That's Band of Brothers. No, that's not what we're talking about here. And, yeah.
How are you still peddling this lie after all these years and all the
You know darn well
carnage?
what we mean when we say anti-fascist. So, nobody say, we're big fans of Mussolini,
Right. Have you noticed that the temperatures are cooling off a little bit? Yeah, we're entering mid-September here, and fall is planting season 2. Did you know that many plants and trees actually do better when planted this time of year? But you've got to know where to start, and that's why I love fastgrowingtrees.com. Doesn't matter if you live in the sunny south or if the air is getting chilly where you are, their plant experts can help you find the perfect fit for your space. And that's true whether it's in your yard. It's also true whether it's a house plant. We've been so satisfied with our snake plant, with our spice plants, and oregano and parsley and so many other things, and the big leafy plants too. Loved them all.
Big yard, small yard, no yard. They've got more than 6,000 plants to fit any space, from indoor plants to fruit trees to full-size privacy trees and a whole lot more. Their 14-point quality checklist ensures that you're going to get the best quality plants possible. And remember, each plant is cared for individually based on its needs, from watering routines to the amount of sunlight, which makes sure that your plants will get the care they deserve from the time they start growing right up to the moment they ship to your home.
This fall, get up to 50% off on select plants and other deals at fastgrowingtrees.com. Plus, use the code MARTINI at checkout for an extra 15% off your first purchase. That's 15% extra savings at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code MARTINI at checkout. Now's the perfect time to plant. Offer valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. Check out the link in the show notes and support the show. All right, Jim, let's move to our bad martini. Now, questionable martini, I guess, in a couple different ways. Some would say what's happening, and at least part of this is good. The fallout from what we saw with this horrific murder, political assassination, as Governor Cox called it, of Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University on Wednesday. First of all, what will it mean for conservative speech on campus? Sometimes guest host Inez Stepman from the Independent Women's Forum puts out on Twitter today, or X, this assassination will accomplish what the left has tried to do for so long, significantly shut down conservative speech on college campuses, not because of a lack of bravery, but because of logistics. No more outdoor events, no more events without very serious security. And that costs big money that most organizations don't have. And universities are only too happy to say they can't manage. Already they were using security concerns to punish right-wing organizations and prevent them from hosting speakers. Now there's a real reason. It's the assassin's veto. And then the other thing that we've been seeing so much is people going online, especially on Blue Sky, but also a lot of people on Twitter, talking about how much they're celebrating, how happy they are that Charlie Kirk was brutally murdered. And as a result of that, some people are figuring out where these people work. They're talking to their employers. And in some cases, they're getting fired. Some people think that's taking cancel culture too far. Other people are saying, no. These are people in some cases who are teaching our kids, who are in positions to influence other people. And if this is what they're not only thinking, saying, and willing to publicly post, then they have what's coming to them.
First of all, on the question of the assassin's veto, a couple of my colleagues at National Review have already said they've had events canceled. Or really, they're not saying canceled, they're saying postponed. And I don't begrudge any institution that's like, whoa, before we do this, we got to make sure we have the right kind of security precautions. We don't want anything terrible to happen. I don't think, I think that's entirely rational. I also think, though, that a consequence is that this assassin did what they wanted to do. They have made people fearful to speak, fearful to attend, fearful to be in a venue where somebody, God forbid, has some gun and manages to do something and hurt and kill someone. I don't know how to square that circle. I don't want to see any more violence. And I think that there's unfortunately a genuine risk of some copycat or somebody deciding they want to go out and do something terrible. The other kind of thought came to mind today. John Podhoretz, was with commentary and used to edit the New York Post editorial page, had a really good short Twitter thread. If you haven't seen it already, I urge everybody to read it. His general point is like, look, almost everyone has bad thoughts. Almost everyone has things they say that if they said them out loud or they said them in a public forum would be shocking and horrible. Maybe not you, Greg. You seem like the nicest guy in the whole wide world. But like, you, how often on this podcast have I used the joke, we have to stop, history's greatest monsters like Hitler and Stalin and Adam Gase. Now, I don't actually think that former New York Jets coach Adam Gase is really one of history's greatest monster. Okay, all right, he didn't kill anybody. He may have just killed our hopes and our spirits and all that kind of stuff. So I can do this kind of jokingly, oh, this person is the worst person ever. How many sports fans have said, oh, I'm going to kill that ref, or something? They aren't actually going to kill them, right? The different, and people have always had these kinds of thoughts. They've always thought, oh, that SOB who cut me in traffic, or angry at coworkers, angry at neighbors, all kinds of things like that. The thing is that usually you kept them up in here, and they didn't come out of your mouth, and also they generally didn't go out on a platform where instantly the whole wide world can see it. And so John Podhoretz's point is that, right around 2007, the birth of cell phones and smartphones and social media, suddenly you have this very ugly thought in your head that you kind of know is so you would never go out and deliver a prepared speech arguing people who disagree with me have died a violent death, and I'm happy about that. But you have that instant reaction and you put it out there. Now, obviously, having the ability to control your emotions and having your ability to control that, not every negative thought is going to turn into a negative action. But now we have something where if you don't have that self-control, if you can't hold in your id and your ugliest thoughts, you can blast it out to the whole wide world. And so, John's question is like, how does civilization continue to function when we can see every ugly thought that everybody has? Racism, sexism, pornographic stuff, like people can just blurt it all out now because of that combination of anonymity and an audience. And that's just kind of a really frustrating one there. And this comes to the question of what do you do when somebody puts out something on social media that's really ugly, like I'm really glad Charlie Kirk got assassinated or something. Undoubtedly, it's got to be some reaction. I could see a scenario where somebody would say, we don't think you need to lose your job, but you really need some anger management skills. You really, even if you're having these thoughts, you should not express them. You should not be putting this out into the world. And if you want to celebrate the death of Osama bin Laden, okay, that guy had it coming. Charlie Kirk said the stuff you didn't agree with. In the grand scheme of life, that's a really small potatoes. That's a really small sin that you literally want this person to be executed for. You want his wife to be a widow. You want his kids to be orphans. And even in our, worst moments, when we're most mad at somebody, you're probably supposed to, keep that in check. Some would even say that this is sin, right? Or this is at least the opportunity for sin. This is the birth of sin. There are some who'd say that negative thoughts lead to negative actions. I'll let psychologists and I'll let, theologians debate that. But here's the thing. You probably don't want to let those thoughts run free. You probably don't want to dwell on them. You probably don't want to be someone walking around with a lot of hate in your heart. What keeps civilization running is, you see after the game, after a football game, usually a whole bunch of players get together and they don't just shake hands and hug with the other guy. Then they get around in a prayer circle, a bunch of them. Right. And there's this kind of this sense that look, we can vehemently disagree, but we also we recognize we're fellow human beings. We recognize we're fellow Americans. We have some sort of, if not love for each other, maybe not even respect for each other, a tolerance for each other. And we need to have that. And I think that, so my sense is if you're an employer, you can't ignore your employee running off and saying crazy and, horrible and hateful things. You got to address it somehow. Every person who does this need to be fired? If I found out that my nurse or my doctor was running around apparently someone was a suicide prevention coordinator in some state agency. There's suicide, not homicide prevention. I guess this person's a big fan of homicide. That's hunky-dory. But suicide, that's where they draw the line. So, like, yeah, I think if you're an employer, you got to respond some way. I don't know if a firing is always what is absolutely necessary. People screw up. People make mistakes. But I also kind of recognize you can't ignore it. You got to address it in one form or another. And how many people would change their tone if their employer sat them down and said, your job is hanging by a thread. You really need to, learn some impulse control. You want to write this on a piece of paper and keep it in a drawer of all the things you've ever wanted to say and hateful? Fine, go right ahead. But don't put this out in the world because you're really hurting the image of our institution.
John Roberts over at Fox with a good tweet today to sum it up. It's really quite stunning to see the sheer number of people who are blowing up their careers through their compulsion to post violent and temperate videos about Charlie Kirk on social media platforms. All right, let's talk about OneSkin. OneSkin goes in smooth, Mrs. Carumba says. It's not greasy. It absorbs great. But what will OneSkin do for you? Well, it's going to help you protect your skin from the sun, but it also helps you protect your skin from things like collagen loss and inflammation. And it might even help repair some of the damage you did when you were younger. And the good news is OneSkin is here for you too.
OneSkin's entire research and development process is run in-house, strictly adhering to the rigor of the scientific process from start to finish. OneSkin believes the purpose of skincare is not just to improve how you look, although that's important, but to optimize your skin's biology at the cellular level so it's more resilient to the aging process.
OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company, and by focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. And for a limited time, you can try OneSkin with 15% off using the code 3ML at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code 3ML. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support this show. Tell them it was the 3 Martini Lunch that sent you. All right, Jim, as promised in our Crazy Martini, shifting topics here for some comic relief at the end of the week. Kamala Harris, who is not running for governor, and as we increasingly think, probably not running for president either in 3 years from now. But she is now releasing excerpts from her book. It was in The Atlantic, and a bunch of different places picked it up. The story I've got here is from the HuffPost. But they say former Vice President Kamala Harris concedes she made a grave mistake by holding back from advising her former boss, Joe Biden, against pursuing re-election in 2024, declaring that, quote, in retrospect, I think it was recklessness, unquote. She was really the last person who could tell him to not run again because it would look incredibly self-serving if she told him to get out. But Harris acknowledged that she was wrong to rest such an important call on just Joe and Jill Biden. Quote, it's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that like a mantra as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego, an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. Yet at the very same time, she says, no, he wasn't impaired. Not at all. On his worst day, he was more deeply knowledgeable, more capable of exercising judgment, and far more compassionate than Donald Trump. I don't believe it was incapacity. If I believed that, I would have said so. As loyal as I am to Biden, I'm more loyal to my country. Well, if that's the case, Jim, why did you think it was reckless for him to seek another term? This seems a little bit inconsistent.
Greg, I'm probably going to sound like a weirdo to listeners right now, but I find myself eager to read this book. And it's not out of a great enthusiastic, high opinion of Kamala Harris, but it's kind of like we've seen the 20-car pileup of car accident. Now I want to hear the statements from the drivers about whose fault it is and how it happened and what they knew and what they were thinking as each car slammed into another. And it was because like she's only done a Colbert interview since Election Day. So like we really don't know what she was expecting, what she was feeling. There were accounts in other books that she said that were saying she went into election night convinced she was going to win. So I want to hear about all this. And there's obviously going to be some score settling in this. We undoubtedly expected some blame shifting. In fact, if she had come out and said the loss is on my shoulders and nobody else's, boy, I think we all would have been shocked. And we all would have been like, maybe gained a little bit of respect for her. Based on this excerpt, maybe there's more in this book in The Atlantic, but like this tackles two of the big questions. One of which was like, did you see anything from Joe Biden the 4 years you were his vice president that made you think this guy was not going to be able to handle another 4 years? And her answer is no. Her answer is that, he was not incompetent and he was capable of handling his duties, but she throws in the jet lag excuse. Now, it's like 14, 15 days. I'm sorry, 12 days after the last trip to LA. He was over in Europe. Then he comes back to the United States. He's here in DC briefly. Then he goes back to LA. This is the fundraiser where he does not recognize George Clooney. Now, I know you've probably wanted to forget some George Clooney movies. We can debate whether he ever really was Batman, but come on, you'd recognize, not only like him being a movie star, he'd met Biden like a dozen times before, right? So that was a signal that like things mentally with the memory were not working the way they were supposed to. And then 12 days go by. Apparently he never finished a debate prep session, according to these other books. So there was no reason to think that he was going to do great when he did that. So the whole idea of, it was jet lag. This is, in keeping with her tradition, sticking with the least plausible explanation. But then a large chunk of this excerpt is about how she felt like the Biden White House staff was undermining her at every twist and turn, and that they absolutely never gave her any. First of all, they gave her all the hard assignments. Hey, Greg, if there's something easy and fun and popular, a task for the White House, do you think the president's going to get that one? Or do you think the vice president's going to get that one?
Not the vice president.
Joe Biden, if you ask him, when he's capable of answering, will tell you he feels like he got a lot of the crap jobs under Barack Obama, but he also felt like that's my job as vice president. Foreign leader's funeral, I got to go there. Some topic that we know our base is not going to like, it's my job to go out there and give the speech on it. And that welcome to the vice presidency, Ms. Harris. This is part of the job. You're not going to get the easy, nobody's giving you the T-ball assignments. And she just complains the entire time. I think there's definitely some truth to this. There were contemporaneous reports about the fact that the Biden inner circle didn't really trust her, didn't like her. Long memories about the debate exchange where she basically accused Joe Biden of racism. Jill Biden reportedly was like swearing at her and was like vehemently opposed to her being the running mate, which is undoubtedly a highly unusual circumstance and probably a bad sign. But this whole, account in there just makes it sound like she's blaming everyone but herself. And, was Biden choosing to run again a bad decision that hurt her odds? Yeah. Was Tim Walz no help? Yeah. Was her campaign managed? There were, but on the other hand, you're left with this problem of like, okay, Madam Vice President, what did you do? Because her assessment is that she was doing a great job as vice president. Now, remember, just about every poll about her throughout her had her approval rating in the high 30s, low 40s in a good day, right? So most of the time, 6 out of 10 America, that's all because of Fox News. That's all because of, Karine Jean-Pierre won't talk. That's the thing. When you're complaining Karine Jean-Pierre is not helping you out enough. Really? That was not going to help you much, Madam Vice President. But the last thing that just kind of jumps out at me is, so yes, the excerpts come out earlier this week. The Biden inner circle is not going to take this lying down. They are. They're ready to go. They're rolling up their sleeves and they're ready to fight. And how do they fight? Leak anonymous quotes to Axios. This is the only way these people know how to communicate. Like it's September 2025. Nobody's hiring you again. Nobody, Kamala, you don't need to stay on good terms. Some former Biden White House official said to Axios, Vice President Harris was simply not good at the job. She had basically zero substantive role in any of the administration's key work streams, and instead would just, by the way, work streams is I want to go back and see anybody else in the White House use the term work streams. That feels like, might be able to figure out who this is. Instead would just dive Bob in for stilted photo ops that exposed how out of depth she was. As I write in today's Morning Jolt, because we needed to talk about something lighter. First of all, you see when the Biden staffers are saying she was a crappy vice president, Greg, pass the popcorn. This is fun. This is, but also there's a nice question. Like if you're a senior White House official and you've worked alongside Kamala Harris and your conclusion is she's not good at the job and she's out of her depth on just about every issue, I feel like this is the sort of thing Americans should know immediately. This is not something like, well, in September 25, I'm going to say, hey, America, that person you came within 115,000 votes of electing in 3 swing states. Yeah, she was really terrible at this and she would have been an absolute disaster. That seems like the sort of thing you should say before they decide she's going to be the nominee. Or even after Biden said she should be the nominee. Maybe before the convention. Maybe you come out and say, hey, America, I've been working alongside her. She can't handle stuff. This is going to be a disaster. We should nominate somebody else. Then, failing that, well, we can't let Trump win, so we have to let the person who I know is incompetent because I've been working with her. That's your thinking there? Finally, there's some Biden aide who says Joe Biden made a mistake picking Harris as vice president in the first place. First of all, collect your winnings. This is another case where I'm sorry, America. It's just been handed to me. Conservatives were right the whole time. And everyone was lying to you the entire time. The Kamala Harris was this great, smart, inspirational leader, detail-oriented, blah, blah, blah. So on the one hand, this is absolutely kind of delightful. On the other hand, it's kind of disturbing that so many people thought so little of each other and didn't feel any need. The American public had no right to hear this. I conclude today's jolt by saying Democrats clearly don't really care who their nominees are. Because in the end, they know they're going to get the liberal policies they want. They know they're going to get the progressive policies they want. And their only sense that these people should be good and smart and capable is because it makes it easier, not because they actually think, if you're going to have responsibilities at that high level, you should be up to them. So, hey, you know what? I don't know about you, Greg. I definitely needed this story at the end of this week.
What does it boil down to? Was Biden an out-of-it incompetent president? Yes. Was Harris a completely incompetent vice president and a terrible presidential candidate? Yes. Don't think it gets more complicated than that.
As the meme goes, why not both?
Anyway, Jim, we have made it to the end of the week. I think we're all glad for the break, and hopefully we have a much better week next week.
That's a low bar to clear. See you Monday, Greg.
Indeed. Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. They really do help us out a lot. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific weekend. Join us again Monday, please, on the next 3 Martini Lunch.